Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I hadn't planned on walking into that ceremony. My name wasn't on the guest list, and I knew exactly how my family would react if they saw me there. But when I read about my younger brother Nathan's Aerospace Engineering Award ceremony in the local paper, something inside me told me I had to go. I couldn't explain it, not even to myself. I parked my dusty blue sedan 2 blocks away and walked into the university auditorium like a stranger. The lobby was full of people in sharp suits, shiny shoes, and perfectly pressed dresses. My own clothes were plain: black jeans, a jacket that had seen better days, and scuffed boots that still had desert dust clinging to the soles. Nathan stood on stage under the bright lights, smiling that practiced smile he'd always worn when our parents looked at him. My parents, Frank and Marlene Vance, were in the front row, beaming with pride. I recognized the tilt of my father's chin, the way he always reserved that pride for Nathan. I was 43 years old, and in their eyes, still the failure who couldn't handle the pressure of the aeronautics program, the one who quit. They never knew the truth. The ceremony moved on, each name called, applause following. I stayed in the back row, hoping I could slip out before anyone noticed. But then the speaker introduced someone I never expected to see again: Commander Elias Ward. I froze. He was the commanding officer I'd once flown under, back in the days when I was nothing but a call sign and a classified badge. A man who had watched me push an experimental spacecraft beyond limits that shouldn't have been possible. The last time I'd seen him, it had been on a landing strip under a blood-red sunrise, both of us convinced we wouldn't live to see another. The commander gave a short speech about innovation and courage, but halfway through, his eyes swept across the crowd and stopped on me. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. Then his expression changed. Recognition. "Leona Vance," he said, his voice cutting through the microphone's static. "Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't expect to see one of the finest test pilots I've ever known sitting quietly in the back row tonight." The room went dead silent. He stepped down from the podium, walked straight toward me, and raised his hand in a formal salute. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "it's an honor." I felt every eye on me: Nathan's, my parents', the rows of engineers and officers who suddenly seemed confused. My father's jaw tightened, my mother's face went pale. The commander continued. "Leona flew some of the most dangerous missions our nation's ever authorized. Some of you might not know her name, but you've read about her work, even if the details were buried under classified seals. If there's anyone here who deserves a standing ovation for pioneering aerospace advancement, it's her." The applause started slowly, hesitant, then filled the room. My brother looked stunned, clutching his plaque like it suddenly weighed 100 pounds. I didn't move. I couldn't. My past, the one I'd been forced to keep buried, was no longer a secret. I glanced at my parents. My father looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. My mother blinked rapidly, as if she couldn't reconcile the version of me standing there with the dropout they'd told people about for 20 years. For once, I didn't care what they thought. I nodded to Commander Ward, a silent thank you, and turned on my heel. The walls of that auditorium suddenly felt too tight, and I needed air before someone, anyone, tried to speak to me. As I stepped outside into the cool night, I realized something had shifted. They could never erase me again. I didn't wait for the ceremony to end. The moment Commander Ward's salute was over and the applause died down, I slipped through the side exit before anyone could catch me. I didn't want to see my parents' faces or Nathan's confusion. I couldn't bear the questions I knew would come. The night air felt colder than before, the kind of chill that seeps into your chest and makes you remember places you've been. The windless silence above the atmosphere, the hiss of airlocks, the echo of your own breath in a helmet. I walked for nearly 20 minutes until I reached the old Greyhound bus terminal at the edge of town. It was nearly empty, just a couple of travelers slumped on benches, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from a vending machine. This place was anonymous, unremarkable. That's why I liked it. I sat on a bench in the far corner, pulled my duffel closer, and took out the small matte black tablet I hadn't touched in years. It wasn't connected to any public network. It wasn't even supposed to exist. As soon as I powered it on, the screen flared with an alert I'd never wanted to see again. Red level breach. Project Etherfall. My stomach tightened. Etherfall was the mission that nearly killed me and my entire crew. 15 years of test flights and classified operations, and that one mission still haunted me in my sleep. The breach log showed something worse than a hack. Someone, somewhere within a 50-mile radius, had tried to access or erase the restricted Etherfall files. Whoever they weren't amateurs. Those files were buried under layers of encryption so deep that even I didn't have full access anymore. I stared at the blinking alert, my pulse rising. It didn't make sense. I'd been off the radar for years, careful not to draw attention to myself. But Commander Ward's recognition tonight, maybe that was the trigger. Maybe my reappearance had made someone nervous enough to start covering tracks. I could have called my old contacts, but trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. If someone wanted Etherfall erased, they wouldn't hesitate to burn anyone who stood in the way. I shut down the tablet and stood, my decision made. If I wanted the truth, and my legacy, to survive, I'd have to track the breach myself. The highway stretched out in front of me like a black ribbon. No streetlights, no traffic, just the low hum of my engine. I'd been driving for hours, letting the night swallow me whole. My hands tightened around the steering wheel every time I replayed that flashing alert in my head. Red level breach. Etherfall. There was only one person I trusted to help me dig into it. Dara Selwyn. Dara had been my co-pilot during Etherfall, the one who ripped me out of a half-shredded cockpit when the prototype shuttle nearly disintegrated on re-entry. She was brilliant, stubborn, and had a knack for pulling impossible fixes out of thin air. But after the mission, she walked away from the whole industry, retreating to a rural mechanics shop that barely had a sign. By the time I reached her place, the sun was just starting to rise. Her shop looked like it had been frozen in time. A corrugated metal barn surrounded by scattered car parts and the faint smell of burnt oil. When I knocked, Dara opened the door with a wrench in her hand and suspicion in her eyes. "Leona Vance," she said, like she wasn't sure if I was real. "Last time I saw you, you were bleeding all over my flight suit. What the hell are you doing here?" "Something's wrong," I said. "Etherfall level wrong." She hesitated for half a beat, then stepped aside. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of grease and metal shavings, but it felt weirdly comforting, like slipping back into a time when the only thing between life and death was whether we trusted each other's judgment. I pulled out my tablet, showing her the breach log. Someone tried to access the classified Etherfall files last night. Not just peek, erase. Her eyebrows shot up. Erase? Those files are locked tighter than a space station vault. Who even has clearance to get near them? "That's what scares me," I said. "This isn't random. Someone's trying to rewrite history." We sat at her workbench, booting up her patched-together system, half-salvaged computers, half tech she'd built from scratch. Within an hour, she had tunneled into a secure trace, her fingers flying over the keyboard like she hadn't lost her edge. The digital fingerprint of the breach wasn't just sophisticated, it was personal. Dara stopped typing and leaned back, her face pale. "Leona, this signal doesn't come from an outsider. It's originating from an internal archive at NARA, the National Aeronautics Research Authority. My old home. Someone inside wants us erased," she said flatly. "This feels like a cover-up. If they wipe Etherfall, they wipe us. Every flight record, every line of data that proves what we did out there." I stared at the trace as her words sank in. The encryption tag on the access request wasn't unfamiliar. It was a key I'd seen before. Long ago. Dara caught my expression. "You recognize it, don't you?" I nodded slowly, my throat dry. "It's my father's." The Vance family home hadn't changed in 20 years. The white siding, the trimmed hedges, the spotless driveway, all of it looked like a photograph from a real estate magazine. I parked across the street, sitting in my car for a moment before stepping out. My chest tightened as I climbed the front steps. My mother answered the door, wearing that carefully composed smile she always used when she didn't know how to greet me. "Leona, we weren't expecting you." "I'm here for Dad," I said. My tone made it clear I wasn't staying for tea. She hesitated, then stepped aside. "He's in the study." The oak-paneled study smelled like leather and old paper. My father sat behind his desk, surrounded by the plaques and medals that celebrated his years with NARA. His back was straight, but the look in his eyes told me he'd been expecting this conversation. "Leona," he said, setting down his pen, "I assume this is about your sudden reappearance?" "Don't play coy," I replied. "You accessed the Etherfall files. I saw the breach tag." "Why?" He sighed, folding his hands. "There's a congressional inquiry, questions about experimental projects and accountability. I thought if I reviewed the records myself, I could prepare for whatever accusations they'd throw at us." "Accusations? Of what?" That I flew missions no one else had the nerve to try? That I saved lives while you were in this office polishing your legacy? His jaw tightened. Legacy is all that remains when the dust settles. I wasn't trying to erase you. I was trying to protect the Vance name, our name. Do you know how fast reputations burn in politics? Protect the name? I almost laughed. You spent years letting mom tell people I was the dropout, the failure. And now that the truth threatens your story, you want to control it? You don't understand what's at stake, he said, his voice rising. Etherfall was dangerous. It nearly broke Nara's chain of command. If those files are leaked, it won't just be you on trial. It'll be everyone tied to the project, including me. I stepped closer. Then maybe it's time someone sees what we sacrificed. What I sacrificed. He stared at me for a long moment before reaching into a drawer and pulling out a thick manila folder. These are my personal notes. Documents I never submitted. They detail exactly what happened during Etherfall. The decisions you made, the people you saved, but they also name the ones who tried to bury it. Harrow, the board. Everyone. I took the folder from him. My hands didn't shake, but my voice was softer than I expected. Why give this to me? Because I can't fight them, he said quietly. Not anymore. But maybe you can. For the first time, I saw not the towering executive, but an aging man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten why they were there. I left without another word, clutching the folder like it weighed as much as my past. The hotel room was dim, lit only by the blue glow of my tablet on the desk. The manila folder from my father lay beside it, its papers spread out like fragments of a buried past. I hadn't slept since leaving his study. My pulse quickened when the secure tablet pinged. An incoming file transfer, marked with Mason Rudd's encrypted signature. Mason had been my systems officer during Etherfall, the guy who could hold a ship's failing engine together with nothing but duct tape and pure stubbornness. If he was sending me something now, it wasn't casual. The file loaded, black box audio, Etherfall ops. I put on the earpiece, bracing myself as a wall of static gave way to familiar voices. My voice, Mason's command screaming over comms, ordering us to abort the mission. The memory slammed into me. The orbital platform burning, the stranded research team out of air, and me ignoring the abort call. I had pushed the shuttle beyond safety margins to reach them. My crew and I had dragged 12 people off that platform before it collapsed into the planet's atmosphere. But the official reports, they painted me as reckless, insubordinate, a commander who nearly caused unacceptable collateral loss. Listening to the uncut audio now, I could hear the truth. Every calculated decision, every desperate maneuver I made to keep those researchers alive. I gritted my teeth when Mason's voice cut through the audio feed. Live this time. Leo, you hearing this? This is the raw data they buried. I kept a copy off-grid. Thought you'd want to know before they erase everything. Why now? I asked. Because someone's rewriting history, he said. Harrow and his people are framing Etherfall as a black mark. They're shifting blame for the collateral damage to you, trying to bury what you actually did. I've seen the revisions. Your name's already gone from half the internal records. I stared at the screen, my reflection fractured across it. If they succeed, no one will ever know what happened out there. That's the plan, Mason said grimly. They're cutting out anyone who makes them look weak. You saved lives, Leo, and they hate you for it. I scrolled through the audio timestamps, my hands trembling. This wasn't just evidence. It was the last unfiltered truth about Etherfall. They'll come after you if you surface this, Mason warned. Tribunal hearings, political pressure, maybe worse. Are you ready for that? I closed the audio file, but the voices still echoed in my head. If the price of telling the truth is my reputation, so be it, I said quietly. I won't let them erase us. The tribunal chamber was colder than I remembered, all glass walls and chrome surfaces, as if designed to strip you of warmth before judgment. I sat at the long table under the harsh fluorescent lights, the black box audio data loaded onto a secure drive in front of me. Across from me, Dr. Hallbrook adjusted his tie, his polished demeanor reflecting every ounce of the bureaucracy I'd fought against during my career. Ms. Vance, he began, voice smooth but sharp, you were ordered to abort during Etherfall. Yet you proceeded with a high-risk maneuver that resulted in significant collateral damage to Nara equipment. Do you admit this breach of protocol? I admit I saved 12 lives, I said. If I had followed those orders, every person on that orbital platform would be dead. He raised a brow. This isn't about heroics, it's about discipline. Leadership requires trust in the chain of command. Leadership, I cut in, means making the call no one else will make when lives are on the line. If that offends the chain of command, maybe the chain is broken. A murmur rippled through the rows of observers. I spotted my brother Nathan standing in the back. He was supposed to be here for the award recognition panel later, but now he stood stiff, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Dr. Hallbrook pressed on, flipping through his tablet. Your recklessness jeopardized not only the mission, but also the credibility of this agency. Do you have any remorse? My laugh was low and bitter. Remorse for not letting those researchers burn alive? No, doctor, I don't. I do have remorse for thinking this agency cared about truth more than covering its own failures. He bristled. Are you accusing Nara of— I'm stating a fact, I said firmly, leaning forward. You're rewriting history to protect men like Director Harrow, who delayed support because he didn't want a failed mission on his record. Meanwhile, you frame me as the liability. If that's how this tribunal operates, I'd rather walk out with my name dragged through mud than apologize for saving lives. The room went still. Halbrook's mouth opened, then shut again. He wasn't used to people cutting through his rehearsed speeches. From the corner of my eye, I saw Nathan shift. His expression had softened. Confusion gave way to something else. Doubt, maybe for the first time, he realized the sister he thought had quit was never the person they'd been told she was. Halbrook finally exhaled, clearly rattled. Very well, he said curtly. Your testimony will be recorded. I stood, gripping the drive in my hand. My reputation might not survive this, but I wasn't going to bow to lies. As I left the chamber, I saw Nathan watching me like someone seeing a story rewritten in real time. Director Kenneth Harrow's office was a gleaming fortress of glass and steel, perched high above the city like it owned the sky. I walked in unannounced, badge or no badge, because I wasn't here to ask permission. Harrow looked up from his desk, irritation flashing across his sharp, polished face. Leona Vance, I was wondering when you'd crawl out of the shadows. Cut the act, I said, dropping a small data drive onto his desk. These are the emergency support logs from Etherfall. They show you stalled the rescue order for 27 minutes while we burned out there. You gambled with lives to protect your image. His smile didn't falter. You always were dramatic, he said smoothly. The mission was compromised before you broke protocol. My hesitation saved resources and minimized damage. Saved resources? I stepped closer, my voice low and hard. 12 people would have died if I hadn't ignored your precious rules, and now you're rewriting the story to make me the villain. He leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom. You think anyone will believe your version? You're just a washed-up pilot with a record of insubordination. I'm the director. My word becomes history. I almost laughed. Not this time. I've got the unedited audio, the black box data, and witnesses who will testify to what really happened. You're not burying me, Harrow. You're burying yourself. His eyes narrowed. Careful, Leona. I can erase every trace of your career with one call. Your medals, your service files, gone. When people look you up, they'll see nothing but a footnote about a failed test pilot who couldn't follow orders. I leaned across his desk, meeting his gaze. Do it, and I'll release every piece of evidence I have. The drone footage, the logs you doctored, the comms where you ignored our distress call. Your career will end before the week is over. For a long moment, neither of us moved. His fingers drummed lightly on the glass surface, his smirk fading. I could see the calculation behind his eyes, whether to crush me or step aside. Finally, Harrow gave a slow, tight smile. You've changed, Vance. You used to follow orders. Not yours, I said, turning toward the door. Not anymore. I didn't wait for a response. As I left, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever game Harrow was playing, I wasn't his pawn anymore. The purge began quietly, almost surgically. Mason called first, his voice low and tense. Leo, they've wiped my access codes, my clearance, my pension records, gone like I never existed. Minutes later, Dara messaged me from her shop. They've locked me out of every engineering database. Even my patents are missing. It's like they're deleting me in real time. I felt the weight of it settling on my chest. Harrow wasn't just coming after me. He was dismantling anyone tied to Etherfall, cutting us out of history, one file at a time. By nightfall, I set up in a dim motel room, its peeling wallpaper and buzzing light a far cry from the polished control centers I used to command. My laptop was rigged to 3 layers of encrypted servers, Mason patched in remotely, while Dara worked from a jury-rigged console built from salvage parts. "They're trying to bury us," Dara said through the line, her voice tight. "Not just Etherfall, the entire test program. If we let them finish this, no one will ever know what we accomplished." I opened the manila folder my father had given me and scanned the documents. There it was, evidence of Harrow's delay orders, internal emails warning of political fallout if the mission failed, and memos framing me as unfit for future command roles. "We're not letting this stand," I said. "We compile everything. Black box data, flight logs, comms transcripts, every file they don't want seen. We give them a choice. Acknowledge the truth, or we burn their fabricated narrative to the ground." Mason exhaled. "You're talking about going public? Leona, they'll tear you apart before they let that happen." "Then they'll have to try," I replied. "I'd rather go down fighting than let them erase all of us." It took hours. We built a secure package containing every shred of proof we could find, encrypting it with layered failsafes that would auto-release if tampered with. I sent the ultimatum directly to Harrow and his circle: confess or be exposed. There was no immediate reply, but I knew the message had landed. I could almost feel the ripple of panic on their end. The next day, Nathan called. His voice was hesitant, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Leona, I heard what happened at the tribunal. They're saying things about you that don't add up. I don't know what to believe anymore." "Believe what you saw in that room," I told him. "Believe that I didn't walk away from the fight because some director needed a scapegoat." He was silent for a moment, then said, "If you need me to speak up, I will." It wasn't a promise, but it was the first crack in the wall they'd built between us. The emergency session was called behind closed doors. The tribunal chamber, usually packed with spectators and staffers, was eerily quiet except for the hum of the ventilation system. I sat at the far end of the long table, my hands folded over the encrypted drive. Harrow's absence was glaring, a sign he knew the walls were closing in. To my surprise, Nathan was there, not in the back, but sitting near the front, his posture rigid. When the chairperson asked for new evidence, he stood up, holding a small case. "I have testimony and video records from former officers involved in Etherfall," Nathan said, his voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. "They confirmed that Leona's decisions weren't reckless. They saved lives. These are the real events as they happened, not the edited reports you've been fed." There was a rustle of whispers. Nathan glanced my way for just a moment, a silent acknowledgement that he finally saw me as more than the family's black sheep. The chairperson motioned for me to proceed. I inserted the drive and played the uncut black box audio. The room filled with the desperate voices of that mission, the aborted orders, the research team's terrified pleas, my voice cutting through the chaos as I made the call to push forward. It wasn't heroic, it was raw and messy, but it was real. Then Dara walked in. Her boots echoed against the floor, and for a moment, I felt a swell of relief. She'd come despite the risk. "I was there," Dara said, stepping up beside me. "I saw Leona make that decision. The protocols were failing. Command was too slow. Without her, the entire research team would be a name on a memorial plaque instead of living, breathing people." One of the tribunal members shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared his throat but said nothing. The silence grew heavier as the footage played. The raw telemetry logs, the heat signatures of the collapsing platform, the desperate countdown before our shuttle burned into the atmosphere. When the playback ended, I spoke plainly. "You can erase reports, you can rewrite narratives, but this is what really happened. I won't apologize for leading when leadership was absent." The chairperson leaned back, folding his hands. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he said, "Director Harrow has submitted his resignation, effective immediately. We will review these materials for official record restoration." It was a subdued victory, but it felt like breathing after being underwater for years. My name wasn't just a ghost in classified files anymore. Nathan caught up to me as I left the chamber. "Leona," he said quietly, "I'm sorry, I should have asked who you really were a long time ago." I didn't answer. I just placed a hand on his shoulder. For the first time, I felt like he believed me. The commendation ceremony was nothing like the tribunal. No cold glares or sharp questions, just a small gathering in a quiet hangar at the reopened Aeronautics Academy. A few rows of chairs faced a podium, and beyond that, the flight deck where I'd once run test simulations. It felt surreal to stand there again, not as a ghost, but as someone whose story had finally been set free. Nathan was waiting for me by the podium, holding a small silver medal. "This isn't for heroics," he said with a faint smile. "It's for integrity. You earned it more than anyone I know." For a moment, I didn't trust my voice. I just accepted the medal, the cool metal pressing against my palm like a quiet acknowledgement of everything I'd fought to protect. Nathan stepped aside, his voice breaking slightly as he addressed the small audience. "For years, I believed the wrong story about my sister. I see now that courage doesn't always fit the neat version of success we're told to admire. She taught me that." Our mother was seated in the front row, looking smaller than I remembered. When the ceremony ended, she approached me hesitantly. Her eyes were glassy. "Leona, I'm sorry. I should have asked about your life instead of letting others define it for me." I nodded, because there was nothing else to say. The years couldn't be rewound, but this small moment felt like a truce. Later, I drove to the memorial wall at the far edge of the academy grounds. It was a simple black structure, etched with the names of test pilots who had never returned from their flights. So many of them had flown missions like Etherfall, operations no one would ever read about in a news report, but that had pushed humanity a little further into the stars. I picked a single wildflower from the roadside and placed it at the base of the wall. "This is for all of you," I murmured, "for the ones who gave everything and never got their names cleared." Standing there, I realized the real victory wasn't the tribunal's acknowledgement, or even Harrow's resignation. It was that our sacrifices, mine, Mason's, Dara's, the unnamed, wouldn't be buried under layers of politics and spin. They were remembered, if only by a few who truly understood. As I left the memorial, the academy's doors stood open, sunlight streaming through the entryway. Students in training gear were gathering on the tarmac, their voices bright with hope. I paused, watching them, and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. I had faced the silence, the lies, the erasure, and I was still standing. My story was my own now. Not something my family whispered about, not something Nara could rewrite. I stepped into the sunlight, the metal cool against my chest, and for the first time in decades, I felt free.